Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. We are excited to get started. My name is Nisha Catron, one of the regional marketers here in the office. A quick note before we begin, everyone will remain muted during the presentation to avoid background noise. But if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box at any time. We'll make sure to go over them during the Q&A at the end. Also, don't forget we host webinars every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Pacific. Our next webinar will be about the silent struggle, why conversations about cancer matter, hosted by myself, Nisha Catron. That'll be next Tuesday, June 24th at 9 a.m. Pacific. We'd love to have you join us again. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Derek Lape. Take it away, Derek.
Thank you, Nisha, for that beautiful introduction. As you guys can see, we do have some upcoming webinars, like she mentioned, both June 24th and the next week, July 1st, with Don Erickson. But let's go ahead and get started here. Thank you for everybody for joining us. As you saw through the notices or the phone calls or emails or on our website, whatever actually brought you over to us, this webinar is going to be a little bit different. A lot of what you guys usually see with us is going to be more carrier, product specific. This one ended up being a little bit different. I actually got back from a business trip last week and was told, hey, you got next week's webinar. And I was like, oh, cool. And I was trying to think of something, that I could go through that's a little bit different, that would still really benefit, the agents we have and everything going on. And one of my coworkers actually is like, hey, why don't you do one of the sections from the book you wrote? At first I was like, no. And then I kind of thought about it and all the different phone calls I get from agents and agency owners with different objections and just different things that pop up consistently in our industry. And, I was like, you know what, let's do it. So that's kind of how we landed here to go through these. This can be a pretty lengthy subject. So some of this is going to be a little bit more high level overview look. Some of it will dive into the weeds a little bit, but I don't want to take up 2 hours of your day. So some of this, feel free to take screenshots. I am not going to read verbatim everything that I put in here. If you don't know how to take screenshots, no worries. This will be recorded and on our website, so you can always go check it out at a later time there. It should be up by about tomorrow. So running through this, we're going to start with kind of leading conversations. Then we'll kind of get into some of those objections. From there, we'll go to de-escalation, and then we'll wrap it all up in a nice little bow. Sounds pretty simple, right? So starting out, right, the best way to really overcome an objection is to not have one, right? So, that's pretty much all you guys need to know is just don't have any objections and you're good to go. No, just kidding. But I'm bringing this out for a serious point, and that is leading a conversation is going to be extremely important, right? So one thing you really want to do is when you're going through, prep what's going on and make sure that you're leading a conversation, you're guiding it, you're kind of pre-addressing some of these objections, and we're going to get into that into a second. But this was kind of just a cheeky way of showing, hey, just don't have objections, right? And there is methods to eliminate some of those before they arise, but obviously some are going to pop up no matter what. All right. So like I said, I'm not going to read all this verbatim, but leading a conversation is probably one of the most important things you can do as an agent. So when you first sit down and you're going through a meeting and they come in there, you really want to make sure that you have a process. And a lot of that is going to be fact-finding. It's going to be asking the right questions. It's going to be guiding your client through a path, right? There are a lot of agents out there who they get a phone call for somebody. Let's just use term insurance as an example. Client calls in, hey, I want a term policy. Okay, cool, here you go, goodbye, right? They write it up. They don't ask anything else. That's just what they do. Part of that's they don't want to kill the momentum of the sale. Part of it's fast, it's easy. It's a cookie cutter approach, right? It's one of the things that drive me crazy. And part of that is when I was an agent first starting out my first year, I had a client with his family that I brought over from a competitor, right? Got him a bundle with home and auto, but I didn't ask about anything else. I was new. I didn't want to kill the momentum of the sale. I was just excited to get what I got. So I didn't ask about what other policies they had in place, what other things were going on that I should have, knowing now, looking back. And brought them over, and I did put a note to reach out in about 3 months to ask them about life insurance and some different things because, he was a father, he had a wife, they had 3 or 4 kids. And the next month, I got a phone call from the wife who was crying. Her husband passed away unexpectedly, right? And she didn't work. She was a stay-at-home mom for the 3 or 4 kids. She called me asking if he had moved over the life insurance. I never asked about life insurance, so he never moved it over, right? But the flip side was he canceled it with his other carrier. So there was no more life insurance. So this is one of those things that really got me, just beat into my head. Always ask what else is out there. Always look for other gaps, right? Go through everything, do your due diligence, lead the conversation. And then make sure everything's going through and, you know exactly what's out there for a few reasons. One, you're taking care of the customer. Two, you're not leaving money on the table, right? Three, you can actually cater a plan to them. And when you do that, the client's going to feel heard, they're going to feel safe, they're going to feel taken care of. It is going to eliminate a lot of objections right from the start. Right. So here's some of the questions that you want to ask. Obviously, this isn't an all exhaustive list of everything you could ask. A lot of these questions, that some of which I haven't close-ended or open-ended, they could flip-flop back and forth depending on where you kind of put the emphasis on the question, if you tweak a couple of the words. But the bottom line of all this is the easiest way to lead a conversation is using closed and open-ended questions, right? So you're using these closed-ended questions to get really, just tiny predefined options with limited responses is the best way to put it. So you already kind of know what the answer is going to be when you ask these, but you're trying to get that confirmed in the client's head, right? Versus the open-ended, that's more where you're kind of fact-finding, you're digging for gold nuggets. I've heard some agents call it, right? You're looking for different options and different things that might pop up. Because really what you're trying to find out is what this person's looking for and what they're hoping to get out of it. Because a lot of times when they call in and they say, I want this, it's just something they saw on social media and they don't even know really what it is, just that they should have something and it sounds similar to what they think they need, right? So you're kind of going back and forth between the two, getting information, finding out what's going on, and you're leading that conversation using both closed and open-ended questions to get somewhere, right? And that somewhere is you should have a process like we just talked about here a little bit ago. It's a little bit more in depth, right? So clarifying what matters most to them, reviewing what they already have in place, if anything, what their gaps are for the step 3, giving a recommendation, I like to call them solutions, and then coordinating if they do have, a financial advisor, an attorney, different things like that. You want to make sure that you kind of get in the loop with them so that way you don't lose business to them. I'm sure we've all had that happen where you have a client go talk to their financial advisor and they're like, oh, I'm going to go with this, right? So pulling them in the loop. You're going to be spending quite a bit of time going back and forth between steps 1 and 2 before you move forward. So you're really looking for everything that's there. And this is a really easy way too for you to kind of work in and pre-address some of those more common objections for the product you're selling, right? So if you're doing, let's just say MedSup, very price, specific in what people are looking for, go ahead and kind of address that. This is a great carrier, yada, yada, yada. It's also the best premium, right? Or whatever, right? But going through, and you can start pre-addressing some of those objections are going to come down the road for whatever that specific product is. So you can start to work that into your process, and it will help get rid of a lot of those objections, right? Obviously, very, very high level overview of this, right? You can go a lot more in depth, but if you don't have something firm in place and you're kind of just winging it every time, it's worth it to sit down and just take a couple minutes and refine your process a little bit and look at where you can tweak stuff and what you can do. Really what you're looking for is just being able to identify what that client is actually trying to get, right? Because this is also going to come into play very much so once we jump into these objections. But once you have that, it makes selling a lot easier. It's a lot easier to guide a client to seeing their gaps or what they need when they express it to you, and then offering them a solution for that than it is to try and sell them a product or battle objections, because they feel like they're part of the process. They feel like it's partially their idea, and you being the professional are just giving them solutions to what they need, right? Much easier to sell. Obviously, a big part of the reason why a lot of you guys are here is objections. So we're going to start off a little bit with a bit of some of the psychology and studies that have gone into objections and, buying and different things like that. So a big part of this, and this comes from Harvard research on behavioral decision making. So, pretty reputable. They kind of know what they're talking about a little bit. But most of the people avoid loss more than they pursue gain, right? We all know this really well. A lot of people out there are delaying big decisions, not because it doesn't make sense, even though that's what they're saying, but it's because they're scared. They're not sure, whatever the case is, right? It's an emotional response. It's not logic. For a lot of the reasons they're objecting, it's usually emotions. And then lastly, they really want either social proof, something to confirm that they're making the right decision, or trust. And in our industry, that trust has to be in you, right? The professional, the agent, the salesperson, to actually build that kind of repertoire with them and that trust and that connection. So that way they feel like, okay, this is going the right way. I know what's going on. So a lot of these are going to be, like we're talking about, for especially objections and different things, emotional. So being able to handle that, and that's why that process of leading them and making them feel included eliminates so many objections right off the bat, right? Because they feel included, they feel like they can trust you, and you don't really have to go into trying to name every, policy feature and this and that, because they do care, but at the same time they don't care, right? That's not what's going to sell a policy for a lot of the different cases and scenarios out there. Right. So as far as actual objections, there really are about 4, give or take, that keep coming up. One of them by itself, right? So 42% of objections, almost half, by itself is going to come from lack of clarity. They're just not sure, they don't understand, maybe you didn't explain something well, maybe they just don't get it, whatever the case is, right? They just don't understand it. And then when you tack on these other ones that we have up here, it's going to account for the majority of the objections you will face. And that's where it starts to get really easy to be able to kind of put them all together, because as you'll see, a lot of the objections, even though when you first look at them sound very different, when you kind of take and dissect them all down to what's really under there, they're all very similar in how you can address them. So you don't have to have a completely different approach for everyone. Now, some of them are going to be a little bit different, right? I'm not saying they're all exactly the same, but a lot of it's going to come down to that kind of emotion side of things. So once you understand that and you kind of attack's not the right word, but go to address these concerns from that point of view, it's going to make overcoming objections a lot easier, because you're not necessarily overcoming them. You're having an opportunity to clarify or explain something to a client. So one of the first ones that you're going to look at is obviously they're overwhelmed, right? You gave them a ton of information. They're not insurance professionals. They don't know what's going on. A lot of the stuff flew over their head. And really, they can give you whatever excuse they want, right? But if it sounds like it's kind of like they're just overwhelmed, it's a lot going on, right? What you need to do is kind of just simplify it. Take a step back, take a breather, right? Hey, I know this was a lot to take in all at once, but if we concentrate on one area, this is kind of what this looks like, right? So just taking it one step at a time and getting them to understand what's going on and not making it seem as overwhelming. Uncertainty, right? Pretty close to overwhelming. Sometimes they're not sure. But this one goes a little bit more towards they're scared they're going to regret the choice, right? Kind of that buyer's remorse because maybe they want to go talk to other people. Maybe they're looking at this or that. A good way to do that is to make it seem like that's a normal thing, right? So, yeah, a lot of the people I talk to feel that way, right? But remember, you're not stuck in this. Your insurance needs are going to change. This is something we're going to address every year when we go through our insurance review. This is just a starting point to make sure you're covered now, okay? Another thing you can do is say, hey, that's a normal thing, especially if it's a cold lead that you're calling. You're going to get a bunch of phone calls on this from a ton of different agents. You should talk to them and see if there's better options out there. All I ask is that you review it with me, and that way I can make sure you're getting, the appropriate coverage. I'm an independent agent. I can pretty much get everything, but if I can't get it and you come to me with a great plan, I'm going to tell you that, and it's great, and I'm going to tell you to go for it, right? Because another thing that's going to do is help lock in referrals later from them. They're going to keep coming back to you even though you lost the business. But it's something with that trust aspect in there that's going to help, okay? Insecurity is going to be a big one. They're just not sure they can make the decision. Once again, trust comes into that. If they feel like they can trust you, they're not going to be as worried about making that decision. So breaking it down, simplifying it. And then lastly, we've all been there, price or insert whatever objection, right? But it's the same thing. A lot of it is going to be, you need to clarify whether it's actually price that they can afford it or it's because they don't see the value in it. They don't think what they're paying in is actually giving them something real. Maybe they're comparing it to another policy that another agent gave them that doesn't offer the same coverages. One thing I do with this to kind of get rid of that from the start is usually when I show illustrations, whether it's life insurance, long-term care, I'll start off with a little blurb of don't fixate on the premium here. We can adjust this to fit just about any budget. I just want to show the way this works, right? So that way when another agent calls them with a cheaper price, they just don't jump on it, right? I already addressed the fact that we can adjust this whatever way you want, right? But really breaking it down and figuring out what the real objection is. Because not everybody is going to say exactly what it is right off the bat. They'll give you kind of the normal response of, I need to think about it, right? Which we'll get into, but really figuring out what that objection is. Even if it's price, like I said, is it because they can't afford it or is it because they don't see value in it, right? And it's really hard to, go through and explain something if you don't know what the real objection is. All right, so as far as some of the top objections and going through them, like I just mentioned, I need to think about it, right? I'm sure everybody on this webinar has heard that multiple times in their career. What they're really saying, and this is going to be the majority of the time for all these, it's not always the case when they say, I need to think about it, right? But usually it's they're not completely sold, right? They don't know if they should say yes, it's a little soon. So you need to get clarity. You don't necessarily need to get the commitment, right? One thing that we've done through a lot of our careers and have learned not to do is being too pushy, right? And it's something that even I've had some training on. Oh yeah, you just need to keep it. It doesn't work the way it used to. That whole add-on sales technique and different things that was so great that McDonald's does so well. A lot of us have been preconditioned to start declining that because it is everywhere we go, right? You go to the grocery store, would you like to donate $1? Every time you put in the keypad, wherever it is, would you like to add this? Would you like to do that? So we're so used to just saying no now, that doesn't really work the same way it used to, okay? So really making clients feel understood and heard is going to be a lot bigger and giving them clarity on different things, right? So something as simple as this, right? And I'm just going to paraphrase it. It's a big decision. Just so I understand, is there more about the cost, the product, or something I didn't explain clearly with whatever verbiage you want before that, right? And none of these are cookie cutter approach. Do not say these exactly the way they're written here. Put it in your own voice, your own language, your own personality, right? Because if you're just reading off a script, people are going to hear that. It's not going to sound like the you they're used to talking to, but just something along these lines. And then you just pause, right? And wait and let them say what's going on. A lot of times when you do that after, they're going to give you the real reason because they're not used to being asked that. A lot of times when they say, oh, and you think about it, a lot of agents are just like, okay, well, let's, meet up next week. Okay. If you actually ask them when they're not used to it, a lot of times they'll give you the real reason they're holding up on it, and then you can address that reason, right? And that's a great thing. And if you put the emphasis on actually being happy when you get objections is a chance to clarify the product, right? And normalizing it and saying things like, that's a normal feeling. And these are questions you should ask every agent, right? They're going to start asking those when they do get those phone calls from other agents. And a lot of agents, and this is going to blow your mind, right? But a lot of agents actually aren't that great at handling objections because to them, it's just a numbers game. I'll move on to the next person, super easy, right? Or they'll just come back, or it's price, or it's all about the, different options that I can add on to this product, whatever the case is. So if you get it in the client's head to ask that question, especially when you're able to address it, it's going to make you be in a lot better position for them to keep coming back to you because you're that expert. You're the person they trust, right? Versus these other agents who either can answer it or maybe they can, but it's just not that great, right? So getting them used to that and using this as an opportunity instead of being like, oh God, I got another objection, right? Just it's a good thing, I promise. Right. So it's too expensive. We already kind of touched on this one, but understanding whether it's, do they see value in it? Or are they comparing it to something cheaper? Can they just not afford it? Right. And you got to figure that out because you're going to have different responses on what part it is, right? Maybe it just seems a little expensive to them, but they can't afford it, right? Then you can give that old, hey, it's only this much a month. That's less than a cup of coffee that I'm sure all of you guys have heard, or something similar along those lines. Maybe if they don't see the value and they have a ton of money and this, right? And then you can start getting into the, okay, is it going to be more expensive to pay for this? Or if something happened to you tomorrow, is it going to be more expensive for your family to try and fix that? Obviously, don't phrase it exactly that way, right? The script on here is a little bit better. But that's kind of what you're looking for. You need to actually figure out which one it is. I already have coverage or I have it through work, right? A lot of the people are saying, I just don't want to go through this again. I have coverage. They think it's good enough, right? And like we just talked about, they're not the insurance professionals. They don't know. So that's a totally normal thing for them to think, I have something, right? Usually a good thing to do here is kind of position yourself like you're coming at it from a second opinion, a second, set of eyes of, hey, that's great, right? You're ahead of the curve. A lot of people don't have anything. But what happens if you retire? What happens if you switch to another job? Can you keep that insurance? Does the premium go up? And then just kind of pause. A lot of the times they're going to sit there and say, I don't know, right? You'll get a few who are very attention or detail oriented. They're going to know exactly what's going on, but a lot of them aren't going to know, right? And then when they say, I don't know, then you just kind of come back and say, well, I'd be happy to review that for or with you and let you know kind of what happens, if there's any gaps, what your actual coverages are, right? It's kind of a no pressure approach to being able to review their policy because even if they have something through work, most of us know that's not going to cover everything, right? If they leave, a lot of times they can't keep it. If they can, the premiums are going to go up because they're not going to be group rated anymore, right? There's a lot of different gaps and coverages that can arise when they have just their life insurance through work. Okay, so we know that, but we don't want to say it that way, right? We're trying to give them that power or feeling of power that they have some kind of say in this choice because ultimately they do, right? It's their decision whether or not they're going to buy from you, right? So including them in that process along the way is going to make kind of overcoming that objection a lot easier. Let me talk to my spouse. Okay. So we've all been here. So this could either be they're not the decision maker of the household or they're just trying to be nice and blow you off. Either way, and I've heard a lot of agents do this, they're like, oh yeah, go talk with them and get back to me. And then they never hear back again, right? Because if they're not the decision maker, they go talk to the decision maker and they're like, no, we don't need that, whatever. Or they were just trying to get out, right? And be nice about it. What you want to do at that point is say, Absolutely. Just so we're all on the same page, how about we set up a time for all of us to meet or talk, right? Because if they're not the decision maker, you want the decision maker in that phone call or in that meeting, because that's really who the objections are going to come from and the person you need to sell the policy to, right? Or maybe they're on the fence and they were just trying to be nice, but that other spouse does really want a policy and they were the ones pushing them to call. And, they're just like, oh, I called, I did it, it wasn't that great, right? So getting them all in there together, and it helps kind of keep that household dynamic of what's going on without you trying to get in there. I have heard people say things like, oh, I'm sure your husband or wife would love this. How are they going to get mad that you're taking care of the family and this and that? I don't love that approach. It can come back to bite you, right? Because if they go back and say that to the other spouse might be like, really? So it can create issues here and there right off the bat. It can shut stuff down. It's easier just to get everybody included and address both parties yourself, right? Instead of having them go back and forth. Because the other thing too is if you send them there by themselves with that, they can't talk about the policy or the product the way that you should be able to, right? So that other spouse, why it may have gotten placed, you may have got a payment for it, they may cancel it next month, right? Because he doesn't see or she doesn't see the need in it. All right. So another big one, I'm healthy, I'm young, I don't need this yet, whatever, right? Basically, they're saying they don't see any need in it yet. They're healthy, it's extra money, they'd rather spend on other things. Usually for this one, what you want to get into is the now versus later cost. It's going to change a little bit based off of person to person, but it's something simple, right? The fact that you are healthy and young right now is the reason this is so cheap, right? If you wait, it is going to get more if you even qualify. Usually I use an example of my mom who had term policies. By the time those terms, right, they were out of their window and she went to look for new life insurance, she was no longer eligible for anything, okay? That's kind of a big one to sit there. I'm sure most of you have similar experiences or stories that you can tell along that line, right? And depending on kind of how savvy they are, what they do for a living, you can get into another fact, right? The reason this is so cheap is you're right. Something's probably not going to happen. Insurance is a business. They try to make money as well. And the fact that it is so cheap is they're saying that something's probably not going to happen to you. Now, that doesn't mean it's not going to. Things pop up all the time, right? But it locks you in at this price for when you try and come back and it's really expensive and they're saying something's probably going to happen to you, right? And you explain that a little bit better in different words and details, but that's kind of the gist of what you're getting at of you're right, but look, right? So you're just getting that value in their head. Sometimes it's easier to do things with like IULs where you're building cash value. You can also show that on top of just the premium being locked in. There's a lot of nice little different kind of routes to take within that simple script right there, right? Now versus later cost, eligibility, whatever. All right, number 6. I don't want to think about death, critical care, getting older. We've all gotten this quite a bit. It's an uncomfortable conversation, right? Something a lot of people have a hard time talking about or even thinking about. This one, and I've heard a lot of different ways, right? And we are going to touch on that a little bit, but I like to lead with empathy, right? Because it's already hard. You can already see it. Just trying to completely scare them when they're already in that kind of shut down space and don't want to think about it, it's just going to make them not think about it more, right? So something like I totally, see what you're saying. These are really hard things to talk about. A lot of people do avoid it, but avoiding it doesn't protect your family, right? Not planning for something isn't going to stop something from happening, so what can we do now that's going to take care of those people that you love, right? And getting into that, right? Reframing it a little bit of being nice, being understanding, but just getting them to realize, hey, not planning and not talking about it isn't going to stop it from happening, right? And then their family is going to be in a much worse position right? And you want to do that in as nice of way as possible because this is a hard conversation for a lot of people, right? They just shut down. They don't want to talk about it. Okay. And if you're getting too much shut down and too much, whatever, being able to kind of table that and pivot off of it and leave it alone for, a little bit. Maybe it's just part of that conversation and just addressing it again in a nice way. But still, tread lightly, right? You don't want to be too overpowering, and we'll get into some other ways to kind of bring them in on this in a minute that'll help out. But all right, and then another one, when you're dealing with high net worth clients, you will get, I can self-insure a lot, right? One thing I like to do here is differentiate self-insure versus self-funding. So self-insuring is you taking 500,000 to $1 million, putting it in the savings account, whether that's high yield, low yield, whatever, and not touching it ever, except for, let's say critical care for when that happens 10, 20, 30 years down the road, right? That's self-insuring. Self-funding is when something pops up down the road, I'm going to use my savings, 401k, assets, whatever to address it then. Both these carry some risk, right? You have inflation, you have the purchasing power of money going down over the years, especially when it comes to self-funding. You have unexpected costs that could pop up. Maybe you don't have as much money as you thought you were going to have 30 years from now, right? There's a lot of risk there. But some people are still rich enough that they're not worried about that. They know they're going to have a lot of money. And usually what I like to point out to them is they're right? They could self-insure, they could self-fund, they'll be fine. But why would they, right? They can take one of their dollars and turn it into 2 or 3 benefit dollars, right? They didn't get where they were in life by making stupid decisions with money. And obviously don't say stupid to them, right? But by making bad decisions with money and just blowing it when they didn't have to. They can take a quarter, a third of what they were planning on using and putting it into long-term care or some kind of hybrid and getting much more back. And then they can still do something else with the rest of that money that they didn't have to spend, right? It's just a much smarter decision. It is spreading out the risk. It is putting the risk more on the company than it's on them. Why spend their own money if they don't have to, right? And that approach usually resonates a little bit better with those people who have all that money because they didn't get there by just blowing money that they didn't have to, right? They made smart decisions. They worked hard, whatever the case is, right? But it shows them that, hey, you could, but why, right? Why do this? So something that kind of helps there. Another one, and this is a good one that kind of helps with that thinking about death scenario, is a permission-based objection reversal, right? So you're asking, would it be okay if I showed you, how other families have addressed this, right? So you're kind of shifting, the focus of them having to think about them dying a little bit and putting on a different family. And sometimes that's all someone has to do is not think about themselves dying, but see how other families have dealt with it. And that makes it a little bit easier. Would it be okay if I showed you something most people wish they'd handled sooner, right? Basically what this is doing is it's giving the client a sense of control, right? It's reframing the issue so it's not as personal, it's not on just them, which makes it easier for them to handle, psychologically speaking. And it opens the door to keep going on track with that product or whatever you're talking about without sounding very pushy, like you're just ramming it down their throat and you need to listen to this and yada, 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 right? It really helps with a lot of people when they start pulling back or shutting down. You're seeing the shift of, okay, they're kind of in power, right? You're still the professional, you're still guiding it all, but they feel like they're part of this process, they're included, their decisions matter, right? And that is huge for a lot of people when it comes to talking about things like thinking about death or their money or different things like that. All right. Another one that is a great thing to have, right, is, and I call it the cheat code, but is owning the policy or product that you are selling, right? Because then you can say something like, hey, I got this for the same reason I'm showing you, right? To protect my family or whatever the case is, This is a very easy thing to do. A lot of people see, oh, well, if they have it, it must be good, right? They know what they're doing. They're in insurance. They sell insurance all day. Even they have it. So that's why I call it kind of the cheat code. It's a really easy one. Now, a little bit of a asterisk here. If you're a 20-year-old agent, I'm not saying out to go out right now and try and buy yourself a traditional long-term care policy, right? Maybe you get your parents to get it and you can use, hey, I got this for my parents, right? Or whatever the case is. But it needs to be realistic and believable. Yes, young people can get traditional LTC too. I feel like there's better options out there for them, but still, right? And it's a good thing to have and just be able to approach, right? So either you have it, family members have it, whatever the case is. And that's why it's important, right? It puts that personal touch on it. Another thing I want to talk about here, which this may be blasphemy to a lot of agents, but not everybody should be a client, okay? If you're getting a lot of objections and a lot of pushback and it's just not going there and you're just wasting time, right? Be able to exit and close that down professionally, right? You can say something like, I usually work with people that are ready to get things placed in the next 3 or so weeks. If now's not the right time, I can give you a call in 6 months. And if something comes up before that, reach out to me, right? That does a couple things, especially with that phrasing. Is one, it makes you seem a little bit in demand, right? A lot of people are going to associate the fact that you're busy with you're good at what you do. And this isn't playing games. This is just, right, psychology, right? And you are busy. Your time is valuable. It's not a lie, okay? So this is going to do one of a few things with the client. One, they're going to leave. It's done. You're not going to waste time. All those headaches you've had are going to be gone, right? That's still a win for you. Two, a lot of times clients will come back with, oh, well, let's get something in the books. How about this, right? Because they're seeing that you're busy. They're seeing that, people are coming to you, that, you're not desperate for a sale, right? So they're not going to just keep beating you with questions and this and that. And then also, it's a nice way to kind of cut that off. So a lot of times they will keep referring other people, even though you weren't the right fit. They will keep checking in with stuff as things change. You left the door open to be able to call them in 6 months and get back to them and just check and see how things are going, what's changed, maybe set up another meeting, right? Because even though they're, I hate to say a waste of time at that point, but as far as your return on investment, that's kind of what it is. Maybe they're great people, you enjoy talking to them, but as far as just an investment standpoint, you can't keep having the same meetings that aren't closing business, because that's not making money. And it's kind of hard to run a business for free, right? But maybe at that time it's not a good fit. And in 1-2 months, things have changed in their lifestyle, their situation, whatever the case is, and they may be a great fit, right? So being able to kind of show, hey, I want to work with you, I'm here to help, but this may not be the right time or the right fit, right? It is a good way to kind of end it and let it move forward. All right. Here's a bunch of scripts that you can try for different objections, leading different, situations and scenarios. I'm not going to read all these because you can see them all. Like I said, you can grab a screenshot. This will be recorded on our website. Should be up by tomorrow. You can go back and read them. But it is nice to have scripts, right? We all freeze at some points. We all get something we're not used to hearing. Like I said, do not read them verbatim. Put your own spin and twist on it, your own voice, your own personality, because people want to hear you be you. Right? They don't want to feel like they're talking to a robot or a machine or someone reading off a script, right? We've all heard it when we're talking to people like, oh, yeah, that's a script. And we've all been there. So for us, we don't judge as harshly because we've been in the sales industry. We know what's going on. But a lot of people who were never in sales don't quite get it as much, and they hear it and they just start to disconnect and not listen. So being able to put your own spin on it is really what's going to separate you being able to, overcome objections and lead conversations. All right. So de-escalation. A lot of this is going to work in overcoming objections. a lot of these tie together, right? Because a lot of times when things get escalated, it's purely off of emotions, just like a lot of objections are coming from. So this all ties in together really well. As far as something some of you might know about me, some of you don't because I never talked to you before. I was in the Army as a paralegal. I was working as a correction officer at a prison when I was getting my MBA. And then during COVID, I actually did some armed security, right? And the reason why I'm saying this is because these are all roles where it is really good to be able to de-escalate, whether it's verbal confrontation, which is mainly what you guys are going to be dealing with, right? Or physical, but we'll take the physical out for now, okay? So when you go through a lot of different de-escalation training, one of the most important things is staying calm, right? The person who is calm is the person who controls the room, right? No matter what. Even if the person sitting there yelling, going off, thinks they're controlling the room, they're not, right? It's the person that's saying there calmly, waiting for them to take a breath, whatever the case, right? One thing that works for me, and I'm not saying you guys should do this because, like I said, my background's probably a little bit different than yours, is I've gotten really good at not taking things, personally. And if someone is blowing up and venting at me, I can sit there until, they need to stop for a breath. Usually at that point, they apologize, right? And then they're very open to talking and going through stuff, okay? Not saying you have to sit there getting yelled at, and you probably shouldn't, right? But it's something that I can handle because I've been through a lot of that. Not saying you have to do that or even that you should, okay? But one important thing to do is mirroring and labeling emotions. So when someone's, saying, "Oh, I'm so pissed off," or "This is all so overwhelming," right? And here's an example. I would probably phrase this a little bit different. When I mirrored this, I'd be like, is there a part of this that is more overwhelming than the rest? And then pause, right? Because one, I'm asking a question, it's bringing them back in. They're feeling like they're gaining some of that control. They're understanding that I'm listening to them and I'm trying to listen, right? And I'm pausing. That pause does a couple things. One, it forces them to think, right? And as most of you know, it's hard to be mad and think at the same time. It'll get them to breathe, hopefully calm down a little bit. And then they can go into, hopefully, a part that's more overwhelming than the rest. And you can go through and clarify on things, right? And go through. But it helps bring that kind of emotional temperature down a notch and get them to pause and think and also feel like you're actually listening and you care. Because hopefully you do, right? With that pause, using tactical pauses in different places throughout conversation is one thing that's great. It's also a great way to try and cut out the word that you'll hear a lot of times. Because when you sit there and you just pause, it sounds like you're formulating your thoughts and it's going to be super intelligent of what's coming out next, right? The other thing it does is it kind of forces everyone to take a breather and just listen. Now, use discretion on this. If you are on just a phone call, don't let that pause drag on too long. It's just going to sound like you got disconnected or you're not paying attention. And also, even when you're in a meeting or on Zoom, you might be pausing or just listening, but do some kind of nonverbal cues, right? Like nodding your head, looking like you're thinking, right? Different things to kind of show that you're still engaged, but you're thinking, you're pausing, you're letting the room kind of breathe for a second, right? So it's a good thing to do. It kind of goes back to overcoming some of those objections, asking permission-based questions. Would it be okay? Do you mind if? Just these different areas to kind of create a safe space feeling, to feel like they have some control of what's going on, that it's not just you doing everything. All right. Defaulting to a calm posture, right? Just matching energy doesn't work. That usually just escalates things. If you stay calm and steady, a lot of times most people will realize, oh, wow, I'm really blowing up right now. This person's just standing here, and they'll bring it down, okay? And then staying present in the moment, right? Staying grounded, staying calm, that's what's going to lead different things. This is also going to help with a lot of objections, right? Just being able to stay calm and realize, hey, this is something we go through all the time. This is something I address all the time. I am glad you asked this, right? Being kind of happy about objections. Because if you can answer those well, it's a chance for you to really go through and clarify and solidify that sale, right? If you hit that point, they're more than likely interested. Like we talked about, most people aren't objecting or not buying things because they're not interested, right? It's because of one of those many other things, usually emotional, that you can address by staying calm and leading and clarifying what's going on with what they're worried about. One last thing that's something I say a lot is that probably one of my biggest pet peeves, and I'll point out to a lot of people in the office, and a lot of people do this, is they say, I understand, right? Don't say that unless you really do understand. I have been sitting across from an agent who we were in our 20s, a lady was in her 70s or 80s, her husband died of, 50 plus years, and she was not super happy, and the other agent said, I understand, right? And she got tore into by the client. Like, how could you understand? We were married longer than you've been alive, and on and on and on. So be careful with saying, I understand, right? That can blow up a lot of different ways. And here's a bunch of different kind of options that you can say instead of that. When I say a lot is I can't imagine, or I can only imagine how hard that would be. And going from there. I will say I understand sometimes, but I am very careful in making sure it is something I actually understand and have been through or can actually relate to. Just because, and you won't get it all the time, right? Most people just hear that and move on and they're thankful, but you will get someone who is blowing up, who's having a very hard time emotionally from whatever, or maybe you're even just trying to overcome an objection. And if you start off with, I understand, and you don't, that could be a killer right there in moving forward with that policy and a lot of things. So word choice can be very important, and taking note of that will definitely help you out. All right. So wrapping all this together, you are here to be a guide. You are here to lead conversations with different questions and fact finding and digging into things and getting that client to a point of them seeing the need for it. And then you get to come in as kind of the hero or the insurance expert and offer them a solution to what they're worried about, to what their needs are. That by itself is going to eliminate a lot of objections before they even come up. And you can take it a step further and you can pre-address some of those questions that you know are going to be coming as you're going through kind of your pitch of the product, right? But that is going to be the easiest thing you can do. Once you get these objections, stop looking at them as, oh man, another objection. Think of it as a chance to clarify the product, because like we just said multiple times, if they're pushing back, it's not necessarily because they're not interested. It's because they're unsure of something, right? They're worried, they don't understand, it was too much to take in, right? These are all good things to address because it means you're getting that much closer to actually closing the sale, right? And being able to do that is going to benefit you greatly. Also, whether it's going through objections, meetings, right? People are blowing up, keeping your emotional control and conversational clarity is going to help you pretty much in any scenario. Whether someone's yelling at you, you're going through objections, like we said, whatever, right? So focusing on that is going to be a big thing that's really going to help for a lot of this. Right? So a lot of that's going to help you. And lastly, like we talked about, not everyone is going to be a client. That is okay, right? But just end that the right way, right? End it with keeping the door open. End it with seeming like you are a very busy person or whatever the case is. And that way, hopefully they'll come back to you or they will give referrals to you. Or, worst case, which is still a good case, maybe they're just a very difficult client and a headache. And that's still a win for you because you're not going to be spending a lot of time, beating your head against a wall trying to figure out how to answer this or that. Okay. Like I said, this was a very quick overview, But the nice thing is I'm going to be giving you guys phone calls, someone from our office. You have our number. You can always email us. We help out agents with different objections all the time. These were just some of the more common ones and some different kind of scripts or language you can try and methods to approach it. But if you want to get more in depth, just ask us, give us a call, ask us when we call you, email us, whatever the case is, right? Because we're always happy to help out. Whether you want to get more into leading conversations, objections, whatever the case is, we're always here to help out. And this is a very important thing a lot of agents just kind of figure out as they go, right? Which is fine, but this will help you get there a lot faster. And like we talked about, a lot of agents lose sales when they hit the objection space. So it's good for you to be able to address those, make it seem regular. That way, when other agents get objections and they can't answer it, that client's going to come back to you that much faster. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here. Hopefully there's something you learned you can try out, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.